In a quiet little coastal town called Seabrook, there lived a young woman who was as humble as they come. She worked long hours at her family's small diner, serving plates of pancakes and cups of coffee to locals and tourists alike. Her days were predictable but filled with purpose. Though life hadn't been easy for her, she always carried a warm smile that lit up even the gloomiest mornings. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. In fact, growing up, she often wore hand-me-down clothes and learned how to stretch every penny just to make ends meet. After her mom passed away when she was only 5 years old, she grew up under the care of her grandparents, who ran the diner. They taught her the value of hard work, honesty, and kindness, lessons she held close to her heart throughout her life. Despite the struggles, she never complained. Instead, she found joy in the simple things, watching sunsets by the beach, reading books borrowed from the local library, and dreaming about one day finishing her online degree in business administration. It wasn't much, but it gave her hope for a brighter future. One evening, while cleaning tables after closing time, she stumbled upon an envelope tucked inside an old book on the shelf. The envelope had her name written neatly on it. Curious, she opened it and found a letter addressed to her from her late mother. The handwriting was familiar, though faded with time. As she read through the pages, she felt a mix of emotions: confusion, sadness, and curiosity. The letter spoke of a distant past, of a family torn apart by disagreements and pride. There were hints of wealth and power, but also warnings about greed and betrayal. At the end of the letter, her mother mentioned something about a trust meant for her, should she ever choose to seek it out. But without any concrete details, the words seemed more like poetry than reality. She shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just her mother's way of leaving behind comforting thoughts. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A fancy invitation arrived in the mail, wrapped in gold foil and bearing an impressive crest. It was an invite to a high society gala hosted by one of the richest families in the country, the Harringtons. Shocked and confused, she stared at the card, wondering if it was some kind of mistake. Why would such a prestigious family send her an invitation? Did they know her somehow? Or was this all just a cruel joke? Her first instinct was to throw the invite away. She didn't belong in that world of glitz and glamour. But curiosity got the better of her. What harm could it do to attend just once? Maybe she'd find answers to the questions swirling in her mind. So, with trembling hands, she accepted the invitation, unaware that this decision would change her life forever. Little did she know, the people waiting for her at the gala weren't just strangers, they were part of a story she had no idea she was already living. The night of the gala finally arrived, and she stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the borrowed gown that didn't quite fit right. It was a hand-me-down from her neighbor, slightly too big around the waist and a little short at the hem. Still, it was the fanciest thing she owned, or rather borrowed, and she hoped it would be enough to help her blend in, even just for one evening. She twisted her hair into a loose bun, added a touch of lipstick she rarely used, and took a deep breath. This was uncharted territory, but she reminded herself why she was doing this, to find answers. When she arrived at the Harrington estate, her jaw nearly dropped. The mansion looked like something out of a movie, with towering columns, sparkling chandeliers visible through the windows, and valets waiting to park cars worth more than her entire life savings. She stepped out of her beat-up old car, which had seen better days, and immediately felt self-conscious. A few people turned their heads as she walked toward the entrance, whispering behind their hands. She could hear fragments of their conversations. Woe is she? Did someone bring their maid by mistake? Inside, the grandeur only grew more overwhelming. Crystal glasses clinked, and soft piano music floated through the air. Men in tailored suits and women in dazzling gowns moved gracefully across the marble floors, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. She stuck close to the walls, trying to avoid drawing attention, but it was impossible not to feel out of place. Her dress might have been fine for a school dance, but here it stuck out like a sore thumb. Then the host himself approached her. Charles Harrington, the patriarch of the family, was an imposing figure with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. He introduced himself with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you are?" he asked, his tone dripping with thinly veiled disdain. When she told him her name, his expression shifted ever so slightly, though she couldn't quite read what it meant. He excused himself quickly, leaving her standing alone amidst the sea of glares and smirks. Things only got worse during dinner. Seated near the far end of a long table, she tried to make herself invisible, but the man sitting across from her seemed determined to make her squirm. Adrian Harrington, Charles's son, leaned back in his chair with a smirk, openly mocking her. "So what brings you here tonight? Did you win this invitation in a raffle?" His words drew snickers from the people nearby. Someone else chimed in, asking if she brought her own silverware, since she probably couldn't afford the kind they used at the event. Her cheeks burned, but she refused to let them see her crack. Instead, she smiled politely and said, "Well, I guess I'm here to learn how the other half lives." Her calm response surprised even herself, and for a moment, Adrian looked taken aback. But the tension returned quickly when dessert was served, and someone made a comment about how maybe the staff had mistaken her for a guest. Despite the humiliation, something caught her eye, a photograph hanging on the wall. It was a black and white portrait of a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to her. The plaque beneath it read, "Elizabeth Harrington, 1965. She stared at it, her heart pounding. Who was this woman? And why did she look so familiar? As much as the evening stung, she knew she couldn't leave without finding out more. The gala ended, but the questions swirling in her mind only grew louder. She couldn't shake off the image of that photograph, the woman who looked so much like her. It wasn't just a passing resemblance, it was as if she was staring into a mirror from another time. Back home, she rummaged through an old shoebox tucked away in the corner of her closet. Inside were letters her mother had left behind, written in delicate handwriting. She had always thought they were just sentimental musings, but now she read them with fresh eyes. One letter stood out. In it, her mother talked about a trust fund set up for her, though she never explained where it came from or how to access it. Another letter mentioned a lawyer based in New York City, a man named Mr. Thompson, who supposedly handled her affairs. The pieces didn't quite fit together yet, but one thing was clear. There was more to her family's story than she'd ever imagined. Determined to get answers, she reached out to the lawyer. After some back-and-forth emails and phone calls, she managed to schedule a meeting. When she walked into his sleek office building days later, she felt completely out of place again. The polished floors and fancy furniture reminded her of the gala, but this time she tried to focus on why she was here. Mr. Thompson greeted her warmly, but his expression turned serious when he pulled out a thick folder filled with documents. "Your mother," he began, "was part of the Harrington family." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. He went on to explain that her mother had been estranged from the family for decades, choosing to leave their world of wealth and privilege to raise her daughter far away from their influence. But before she left, arrangements were made, a trust fund worth billions, set aside specifically for her child. However, accessing it required proof of identity, something that wouldn't be easy given the circumstances. As overwhelming as the news was, she found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt angry. Why hadn't anyone told her any of this sooner? Why had her mother kept such a huge secret? On the other hand, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was her chance to finally understand where she came from and why her life had taken the turns it did. Meanwhile, back at the Harrington estate, Charles Harrington was losing sleep over the mysterious guest who had shown up at his gala. From the moment he saw her, he recognized the unmistakable resemblance to his long-lost sister, Elizabeth. The same sister who had walked away from the family years ago, leaving behind nothing but scandal and unanswered questions. Now, here was someone who looked exactly like her, standing in his house, claiming to have received an invitation. Was it a coincidence, or was fate playing tricks on him? Charles wasted no time. He called his private investigator and demanded answers. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? And most importantly, what did she want? Fear gnawed at him, not fear of her, but fear of what she might uncover. If word got out that Elizabeth had a daughter, it could unravel everything he'd worked so hard to protect. The last thing he needed was a scandal threatening the family name. For her part, she remained oblivious to the storm brewing behind the scenes. All she knew was that she had stumbled onto something big, something life-changing. As she left the lawyer's office that day, clutching copies of the documents, she couldn't help but wonder, what kind of world was she stepping into? And would finding the truth bring her closer to understanding herself, or tear her apart. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and challenges. News of her connection to the Harringtons spread like wildfire, thanks to Charles Harrington himself. It seemed he wasn't content with quietly investigating her. He wanted to discredit her before she could even make a move. Tabloids began running stories calling her a gold digger and a fraud, painting her as someone trying to weasel her way into their wealthy family. Social media was flooded with memes mocking her thrift store dress from the gala, and strangers online tore her apart in comment sections. At first, the negativity hit hard. She spent hours scrolling through hateful messages, feeling small and powerless against the wave of criticism. But then, something inside her shifted. These people didn't know her. They hadn't seen how hard she worked at the diner, how she saved every tip to put toward her education, or how she spent weekends volunteering at the local food bank. Their words stung, but they weren't going to define her. With renewed determination, she decided to fight back, not with anger, but with proof. She dove deeper into the legal process, working closely with Mr. Thompson to gather evidence that would confirm her identity. It wasn't easy. The Harringtons had layers of secrecy protecting their family history. But she wasn't alone in this fight. To her surprise, Adrian Harrington, the same man who had mocked her at the gala, started reaching out to help. At first, his motives were unclear. Was he doing it out of guilt? Or did he genuinely believe she deserved answers? Either way, his assistance proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered shocking truths about the Harrington family. Hidden away in old records and financial documents was evidence that Charles Harrington had been siphoning money from the family estate for years. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and shady business deals painted a picture of greed and corruption. The deeper they dug, the more uncomfortable Adrian became. He had always admired his father, but now he saw him in a completely different light. One evening, while going through files late into the night, she turned to Adrian. "Why are you helping me?" she asked bluntly. "You don't owe me anything." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I'm starting to think my dad isn't the man I thought he was. And if you're really who you say you are, then you deserve justice for your mom and for yourself." The breakthrough came when they found a DNA sample belonging to Elizabeth Harrington stored in an old medical record. A court-ordered test confirmed what everyone suspected. She was indeed Elizabeth's daughter. The results sent shockwaves through the Harrington family. Some relatives refused to believe it, clinging to their image of perfection. Others quietly reached out to her, offering cautious support. Meanwhile, Charles grew increasingly desperate, accusing her of conspiring with Adrian to ruin him. But she wasn't interested in revenge. All she wanted was the truth. And maybe some closure for the mother she barely remembered. Sitting in her tiny apartment one night, surrounded by papers and photos, she realized something important. Whether she claimed her inheritance or not, this journey had already changed her. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that gala, unsure of herself and her place in the world. Now she knew exactly who she was, and no amount of mockery or sabotage could take that away from her. The courtroom was tense, the kind of quiet that felt heavy and electric all at once. She sat on one side, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Charles Harrington occupied the other, his face pale but stern. The judge's gavel had barely fallen after the DNA results were presented, confirming beyond doubt that she was Elizabeth Harrington's daughter. The room erupted into murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks, cameras flashing like strobe lights. But she kept her eyes forward, focusing on the task ahead. Charles wasn't ready to back down. He stood up abruptly, his voice booming as he accused her of orchestrating a conspiracy with Adrian to destroy the family. "This is nothing but a scheme," he shouted, pointing a finger at her. "She's using my son to take what isn't hers." Adrian stepped forward then, his expression calm but firm. "Father," he said, his tone cutting through the chaos, "I helped her because it was the right thing to do. You can't keep running from the truth." The tension between father and son was palpable, a crack in the polished facade of the Harrington dynasty. For years, Adrian had idolized his father, believing him to be a pillar of strength and integrity. But uncovering the financial corruption, the embezzlement, the offshore accounts had shattered that image. Now he found himself torn between loyalty to his family and doing what was morally right. As the legal battle unfolded, the Harrington family began to fracture. Some relatives sided with Charles, clinging to their wealth and privilege. Others, however, saw an opportunity for change. One cousin approached her during a recess, offering a quiet apology for how they treated her. "We've been blind for too long," the woman admitted. "Maybe this is our chance to fix things." Outside the courtroom, the media circus continued. Reporters camped outside her apartment, desperate for quotes or even a glimpse of her. At first, she avoided them, letting her lawyer handle statements. But one evening, tired of being painted as a villain, she decided to speak up. Standing on the steps of the courthouse, she addressed the crowd gathered below. "I didn't ask for any of this," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "All I wanted was to understand who I am and where I come from. If you want to call me names or accuse me of things, go ahead. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not here for your money or your approval. I'm here because the truth matters." Her words struck a chord. Slowly, public opinion began to shift. People started questioning the Harringtons' behavior, especially when more details about Charles's financial misdeeds came to light. The once mighty family found themselves under scrutiny, their carefully crafted reputation crumbling. Back home, she wrestled with her own emotions. Winning the case meant claiming billions, a life she couldn't even imagine. Yet the thought of walking away felt wrong too. This wasn't just about her. It was about honoring her mother's memory and standing up against injustice. Late one night, sitting by the window overlooking the ocean, she made a decision. No matter what happened next, she wouldn't let the money change who she was. She'd use it to make a difference, to help others who, like her, had been overlooked and underestimated. When the final verdict came, the judge ruled in her favor, granting her access to the trust fund left by her mother. As she walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, she felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew one thing for sure. She was done letting others define her worth. With the legal battle finally over, she found herself standing at a crossroads. The trust fund was hers, a staggering amount of money that could buy her anything she wanted. She could move into a mansion, travel the world in luxury, or live a life most people only dreamed of. But as she sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the stack of financial documents on her table, she realized none of those things mattered to her. What good was wealth if it didn't bring purpose or joy? Instead of diving headfirst into a glamorous new lifestyle, she decided to take things slow. Her first priority was giving back to the place that had shaped her, the little coastal town of Seabrook. She started small, funding repairs for the local school's crumbling roof and setting up scholarships for students who couldn't afford college. Word spread quickly, and soon neighbors were stopping by her diner booth to thank her, not just for the money, but for remembering where she came from. The changes didn't stop there. She used part of the inheritance to build affordable housing for families struggling to make ends meet. She invested in local businesses, helping them grow and create jobs. And she organized weekly community events at the park, bringing people together with food trucks, live music, and laughter. The town buzzed with energy, its spirit revitalized after years of quiet decline. But not everyone celebrated her efforts. Some of the Harringtons still resented her, seeing her actions as a threat to their legacy. Charles refused to speak to her, retreating further into bitterness as his empire crumbled around him. Others, though, began to soften. Adrian, in particular, became a frequent visitor to Seabrook. At first, he claimed he was there to keep an eye on things, but it wasn't long before he admitted the truth. He'd admired what she was doing. Watching her turn wealth into something meaningful made him question everything he'd ever believed about power and privilege. Their relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect rather than grand gestures. They spent hours talking about their families, their dreams, and the mistakes they'd both made along the way. Adrian confessed that helping her uncover the truth had changed him. "I used to think success meant having more," he said one evening as they walked along the beach. "But now I see it's about making a difference." She smiled, kicking off her shoes to feel the sand beneath her feet. "Funny how life works, isn't it? A few months ago, I didn't even know who I was. Now I'm learning who I want to be." As the months passed, the once snobby millionaires who had mocked her began flocking to Seabrook, eager to win her favor. They showed up at charity events wearing designer dresses and suits, hoping to get noticed. But she saw right through their insincerity. She surrounded herself instead with genuine friends, the kind of people who cared about her, not her bank account. One day, while flipping through old photos, she stumbled upon a picture of her mother. It was faded and worn, but her smile was unmistakable. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't just Elizabeth Harrington's daughter anymore. She was someone who had fought for justice, stood by her values, and chosen to lift others up. And deep down, she knew her mother would have been proud. This part wraps up her transformation and sets the stage for the final chapter, focusing on her impact and personal growth. Years passed, and the once quiet coastal town of Seabrook transformed into a vibrant hub of opportunity and kindness. The woman who had once been mocked for her thrift store dress became its heartbeat, a symbol of resilience, generosity, and hope. She didn't seek fame or recognition, but her actions spoke louder than any title ever could. People often said she carried herself with grace, not because of her wealth, but because of the way she treated everyone around her with dignity and respect. Her efforts rippled far beyond Seabrook. Inspired by her story, other communities began reaching out, asking for advice on how to rebuild their own neighborhoods. She traveled occasionally, sharing what she'd learned about turning pain into purpose. But no matter where life took her, she always returned home, to the ocean breeze, the familiar faces at the diner, and the sense of belonging that grounded her. One day, while sitting in her favorite spot by the beach, she picked up a pen and started writing. At first, it was just snippets, memories of her childhood, lessons from her mother, reflections on the gala that changed everything. Slowly, those fragments turned into chapters, and before long, she had written a memoir. It wasn't just her story. It was a testament to the power of staying true to oneself, even when the world tries to pull you in different directions. When the book was published, it became an instant bestseller, resonating with readers across the globe. Through it all, Adrienne remained by her side. Their bond had grown stronger over time, rooted in shared values and mutual admiration. Though he still came from a world of privilege, he worked tirelessly to reform the Harrington family's practices, steering them toward transparency and ethical behavior. Together, they proved that love isn't about where you come from, it's about who you choose to be. The Harrington name, once synonymous with greed and scandal, slowly began to change. Under Adrienne's leadership, the family redirected their resources toward causes that mattered: education, healthcare, and environmental sustainability. Some members resisted, clinging to old ways, but many embraced the shift. For the first time in decades, the Harringtons were known not for their wealth, but for their contributions to society. Back in Seabrook, she stayed humble despite her success. She still worked shifts at the diner whenever she could, chatting with regulars and pouring coffee like nothing had changed. To her, it was important to stay connected, to remind herself of where she started and why she kept going. Her neighbors loved her for it, saying she was proof that real wealth isn't measured in dollars but in character. On a crisp autumn evening, the town gathered for a special celebration. They unveiled a plaque dedicating the newly renovated community center in her honor. As she stood there, surrounded by friends, family, and strangers turned allies, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "This isn't my victory," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It's ours, because none of us gets through this life alone." As fireworks lit up the sky, she looked out at the crowd, seeing smiles instead of judgment, unity instead of division. In that moment, she realized something profound. Her journey hadn't been about proving herself to others. It had been about finding peace within herself and inspiring others to do the same. And so, her legacy lived on, not as a tale of riches or revenge, but as a reminder that true strength comes from the heart.